All right. Sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
No, it's okay.
I can move all the way.
No.
Thank you for your service, sir.
You're welcome. Thanks.
With this in mind, I'd like to draw folks' attention again off our starboard side. Past all these moored sailing vessels, you will see a rusty iron ground bridge, the Northern Avenue Bridge, which is a turnstile bridge stuck in the open position. And just beyond that bridge is the former site of Griffin's Wharf, where on a cold December night in 1773, the Sons of Liberty, loosely disguised as Native Americans, stormed down Griffin's Wharf and boarded 3 merchant vessels, the Eleanor, the Beaver, and the Dartmouth, and with a rallying cry of no taxation without representation, dumped 340 crates of East India tea into Boston Harbor. They were doing this as a protest against the taxes that were being levied against the colonies by the British Crown, despite the fact that the colonials did not have a voice of representation in the British Parliament. This protest would come to be known as the Boston Tea Party, a party that would cost the Crown somewhere in the realm of $1.5 and $2 million by today's standards. King George would respond to this act, which he considered an act of treason, by sending 5,000 British troops to occupy the city, as well as a fleet of battleships to blockade Boston Harbor, cutting off her vital trade. Those green rooftops are seagulls eagerly awaiting their next meal, and on either side of the fish pier there are multiple vessels called stern draggers, which drag huge fishing nets off their rear or stern. There is one vessel with its stern facing out towards us, and you can see the giant wheels of nets it carries on it, hence stern dragger. These will leave the pier and travel 150 miles out to sea to George's Bank, the richest and most fertile fishing grounds in the world today. Ever since settlers first arrived in Massachusetts, they've had to turn to the bounty of the sea to make their living, as they soon found out the land was not ideal for agriculture. To this day, we still rely heavily on the sea's bounty, as the fishing industry brings in an annual $9 billion worth of revenue to the down there. But this vessel is one of the Supermax containers. This is one of the largest vessels that our terminal here in Boston can support. But we've actually been digging our channels to be able to dig up our channels to make them deeper, so a vessel like the Ever Fashion can be able to enter in and out of Boston Harbor freely. As you can see, it's carrying thousands of those containers atop its deck, each one capable of holding millions of dollars worth of goods inside. These are loaded and offloaded from the vessel via the tall cranes you see standing here on the waterfront, cranes which I have dubbed the Imperial Walkers. That nickname is no coincidence, by the way. It was cranes like these in Oakland, California that inspired a young George Lucas and his design team when they were designing the Imperial Walkers for the second Star Wars film, The Empire Strikes Back. You can kind of see our approach to Castle Island, the first of 34 Boston Harbor Islands that make up the Boston Harbor Island National Park in the Outer Harbor. Now the Castle Island is accessible by both foot and vehicle. Folks make their way out here to explore its most impressive feature, this enormous fortress, the Fort Independence. There's always been a fortification out here on Castle Island ever since the city was founded, but it wasn't always a Fort Independence. Originally, this was just a small wooden stockade called Castle William. But that would all change in 1776 on Evacuation Day, when the British blockade of Boston was finally broken and their forces were forced to retreat. But one of the last things that the British did before departing the city was to bombard and destroy Castle William. It wouldn't be until 1799 that second President of the United States, John Adams, would commission the construction of what would eventually become the Fort Independence out here. The fort would be further fortified over the following decades and manned throughout the American Civil War, though it never saw any action during this conflict. What it did see, however, was a series of illegal duels fought out there on the island. One such duel was fought in 1817 over a drunken game of cards between one Captain Green and Lieutenant Massey. Green accused Massey of cheating and challenged him to this duel, picking sabers as their weapon. The duel was only supposed to be to first blood drawn, but the belligerent Captain Green ended up fatally stabbing Lieutenant Massey. Massey was much beloved by his men on the island, unlike the very unpopular Captain Green, so the lieutenant's men plotted a terrible form of revenge against the captain. They got Green good and drunk and brought him down to the lower levels of the Fort Independence, to the dungeons, where they shackled him to the floor, and then with brick and mortar sealed him in to the very walls of the Fort Independence, condemning him to a slow death. An excavation of the fort in 1905 did uncover the remains of a human skeleton who had been shackled to such. When they arrived in the city, they were not initially given the warm welcome that they had hoped. Instead, they were met with small signs and shop windows and storefronts which simply read NEDA, which was an acronym for No Irish Need Apply. But time would ultimately be kind to these Irish immigrants. Today, Boston is home to the second largest Irish population in the world, right after the Emerald Isle itself. And coming next on our starboard side is a relatively new arrival to Boston Harbor. You'll see this large white-hulled sailing vessel with 3 tall gold masts. When she made her way down here in the summer of 2019, coming in from Canada, she was the tall ship Caledonia. Her new owner, who paid $1.5 million for her, converted the Caledonia into a floating oyster bar and restaurant. Now she simply goes by the name The Tall Ship. She had her grand opening at the beginning of last summer and quickly established herself as one of the most happening spots in the city. You'd see crowds of folks gathered at the tables in front of her on the pier. Those converted cargo containers, as they are on the waterfront, have been turned into food stands. But of course, the main feature is the vessel itself, which features an excellent bar there on her top deck. They've been getting her ready to open up for her second season. So if folks find themselves in town again in the near future, especially on those warm summer nights, I do recommend make your way over here to the Tall Ship. It is quite a treat. East Boston, like much of the city itself, originally started as a series of small islands and peninsulas surrounding a much wider Boston harbor. But over the centuries, they filled in the gaps until it became one continuous landmass, coming to momentarily. But right between these two rivers, here off our starboard side, is the city of Charlestown. It's in Charlestown that we will find the last shipyards to close in Boston Harbor in 1973, the Charlestown Navy Yard. Today, about 25% of the original Navy Yard has been preserved as a national park and is the home of 2 permanent residents, the USS Cassin Young and the world-famous Commanding General would later write in his journal, with victories like these, we are sure to lose the war. But now on our starboard side, we have the first permanent resident of the Charlestown Navy Yard. This large, gray, steel-hulled vessel is the USS Cassin Young, a Fletcher-class destroyer from World War II built in 1943. She was the last American warship to be struck by kamikaze pilots during the Battle of Okinawa. During the battle, one of the pilots managed to get all the way down to the engine room, resulting in the deaths of 22 crew members. But the remaining crew acted fast and were able to keep the Cassin Young afloat. She was decommissioned in 1960, and now she sits here as a floating museum and as a testament to all the ships built and repaired here at the Charlestown Navy Yard. But here we are, ladies and gentlemen. On our starboard side, we have Boston's most famous resident, the oldest commissioned naval warship still afloat in the world today, the USS Constitution, Old Ironsides, with her tall masts and her distinctive black hull with white trimming. And this is a great shot we have right here, too, especially with the Bunker Hill Monument there in the background. The Constitution was built in 1797 and first saw action against the Barbary pirates in the Mediterranean Sea. But it wouldn't be until the War of 1812 that she'd achieve eternal glory, as well as her nickname, when she went up against a British warship, the HMS Guerriere, off the coast of Nova Scotia. The Guerriere, was the most powerful and feared warship of her day. Nevertheless, when the Constitution engaged her in battle, she sunk the Guerriere in 35 minutes. The captured crew from the Guerriere would later tell the sailors aboard the Constitution that when they fired upon her, they witnessed their cannonballs bouncing harmlessly off the Constitution's hull, swearing that her sides were made of iron. She is, in fact, actually made of Georgia live oak. Nevertheless, this would give rise to her nickname, Old Ironsides. She went on to fight in over 42 battles and never lost one of them. Now, I do have a little bit more about the Constitution, but before that, I would just like to address, as we make our turn, the mouth of the second freshwater river to flow into Boston Harbor, the Harvard University. And spanning the mouth of the Charles, connecting the city of Boston to the city of Cambridge across the way, is the Leonard Zakin Memorial Bridge. You might have noticed that the 2 support pillars rise in mile every year. This she will always do on Independence Day, the 4th of July, where she'll be escorted from the docks of the Navy Yard out to Castle Island. There, in front of the Fort Independence, she fires a 21-gun salute in honor of America's birthday before returning once more to the Navy Yard to dock again. waterfront of Boston's historic North End is Commercial Street, where, just over 100 years ago, on an unusually warm January day in 1919, a strange, sticky, tragic stone of rock suddenly exploded. As it did, it unleashed its contents in a massive tidal wave that swept down Commercial Street at nearly 35 miles per hour and crested as high as 20 feet at times. It carried off 22 people and over a dozen horses to their deaths and destroyed multiple buildings and vessels along the waterfront as it went. The following morning, our local paper, the Boston Herald, which is still printed to this day, ran a headline on their front page dubbing this tragedy the Boston Massacre. Honestly, Boston Herald too soon. The definition of too soon. Time punched numbers as the great molasses flood. It took 6 years for them to clean up all the spilled molasses here. You still smell that sickly sweet molasses. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're being treated to a splendid view of our city skyline. And right up in the center of the skyline, you'll notice this distinct gray granite clock tower. This is the Custom House Tower. Built atop what was then the new Custom House, established in 1847, a very much under 500 feet, making it, for a period of about 50 years, Boston's tallest, and for a time, only skyscraper. Being a clock tower, the Custom House Tower does have a clock face on every side, 4 in total. Each one of those clock faces will give you a different time. And each one of those times, more times than not, will be wrong. And that's because the high winds at the top of the tower will actually turn the hands of the clocks backwards and forwards, depending on wind speed and direction. So Bostonians have come to lovingly call it the four-faced liar. But bring our attention back down to earth. If we look to the shore, we can see the green trees